Well, hello there. Welcome to Seaside Quilting Tutorials. My name is Terri, and today I have a little treat for you. No, it's not candy. I know it's Easter, but I think these are just about as sweet. We're going to make some fabric boxes. I think they're cute. Now, I did these a little bit differently because they're for a couple special little girls, Barbara's granddaughters, and I wanted to do a little something special for them, so I made one for Lily and I made one for Ari. I just need to sew on Ari's little flip-flops. I've been trying to find some uses for buttons, so I found some for this project, but we're going to do ours just a little bit different than these. Similar but different. So to get started, and I'll have some extra sizes up on a PDF in our group. If you haven't joined our group, please come to Seaside Quilting Supplies LLC on Facebook and just click on groups and click to join, and there'll be 3 little questions, and you really need to answer those questions to join our group. And if you don't, well, you don't get in. I'm sorry, but we do that to make sure that we don't have bots trying to join the group. So please answer those questions and join us. It's a fantastic group. We share our projects, we share ideas, people get to ask questions. There's all kinds of people there ready and willing to help out, and it's just a fun place. We all feel like family there, or at least I hope we all do, and they've become my family and I really enjoyed it, so I hope you'll come join us and keep watching us on YouTube. So to get started, we picked out this really cute chicks fabric. I thought it was going to be fun since it's Easter season. I had planned on getting these out a little bit earlier to you, the tutorial, but I didn't get a chance to. I'm really sorry. But I'm getting it out before Easter at least. So how we're going to start, these are the extra small ones. And like I said, I'll have some more sizes for you in a PDF in our group. These are cut 11 by 11. You'll need 2 of your outside print, and you will need 2 of whatever you decide that you want to use for your interfacing. Now you could use a heavy interfacing. This is a fusible fleece from Pellon, which we have available at Seaside Quilting Supplies. So you'll need 2 of those, and these are all the same size, so you're going to cut them all 11 by 11. And then you'll need your inside lining, and you'll need 2 pieces of that as well. Whatever you choose for your lining, it can be a print inside and outside, it can be solid outside and a print inside. It all depends on what you would like to choose. And you don't need a lot of fabric for these unless you decide to make some of the really larger ones. But these smaller ones don't take a lot of fabric at all. With these being 11 by 11, you can see that it doesn't take much fabric at all. And so the first thing that I did was I ironed on my fusible fleece. Now you could also use the Craftex foam. You could use the NR Form Plus. However, it depends on how stiff you want your box to be. Now if you're going to use them to put fat quarters in and whatnot, these would be more than adequate, because putting fat quarters in will keep this stable and standing up, And even with just this fusible fleece, it is standing up really well. And you could even fold this down lower and make it a shorter little box. And you could put like some threads in there. You could stack several threads in here. I think you could probably get about 12 or more spools of Orifil thread in here, which would look really cute. You could use it to put your clips in, which would be handy. There's so many handy uses for these in our sewing room that I think they're going to be wonderful, and I think you're going to have a lot of fun making these. You can decorate them with different lace. You can decorate them with decorative stitches along the edges. You could even put some applique on here. If you have an embroidery machine, you could put some embroidery on here. I did the little names in embroidery on my embroidery machine. There's just so many different things that you could do to decorate your little boxes. And I'm sure that you've maybe seen some others do their boxes. I'm going to do something just a little bit different today, and I'll show you what that is. Back when I was making the, what do you call it? The little Happy Totes. I can't remember what the exact name of them. I know that they were Happy something. The name's not sticking with me at the moment, but I did those just a little while ago. And when I was using the 16 gauge vinyl on those, I was thinking about this project coming up, and it occurred to me, wouldn't it be lovely if on these, if we put a little label holder, so that if you're storing your little boxes, say you put batik fat quarters in one and maybe some floral in another, or you want to organize them by colors inside of them, these little labels would come in so handy to slip a little, we'll just pretend this is in here. And of course it would have to be a little, I use this for my template for cutting one out. And so we'd have to cut it a little bit smaller so that we could slip it in. And so what we're going to do is we're going to stitch along each side, and you would be able to slip a piece of paper in here with a tag that lets you know what's inside your box. So if it's up on a shelf, it will be easy for you to go over to the box and see that's what's in that box and grab the right one, instead of having to pull them down or try to remember which one's in this color fabric box or whatever. I thought it would just be so neat to have a little label on there. So we're going to do that with these today. And so that's how we're going to start our project. Now this is kind of an experiment. I haven't made one like this yet. This will be my first one, and I'm making it with you. So the first thing that you'll want to do is take your lining fabric, and we're going to fold it in half so that we can find the center, and just finger press it a little bit. We don't need a hard press, we just need to see where the middle is. And I'm going to measure my little piece of vinyl. It's about 3 inches. And you can make your label as long or as wide as you would like to make it, or your label holder rather. Let me see, I'm going to grab a ruler, and I'm just going to try to line this up so it's somewhat centered on here. And actually that's pretty centered. I'm going to move it up a little bit And I'm figuring probably at least an inch from the bottom, because when we sew these, when this gets sewn to the other side of your box, we're going to be doing a 1/2 inch stitching. So we want to make sure that we have this up at least a 1/2 inch. I'm going to go, let me see, I'm going to go 1.5 inches up, because I'm also going to add a little bit of lace to the outside as well. So I want to make sure that I have it up enough so it will be high enough so when I fold this over, and let me see, whoops, sorry, hit the camera. Let me see, I'm going to be folding it over approximately 2.5 inches. So if I take in 1/2 inch of stitching, yeah, that'll be just about right. So I figure about, for me, about 1.5 inches from the bottom should be pretty good. And let me make sure that I have this. Yep. So I'm going to take a little bit of tape, and I'm going to put a little piece of tape on each side of this just to hold it down while I'm sewing it. So I'm just going to use some masking tape to tape this down. And it's going to serve two purposes. One, to keep my little vinyl piece in place. And two, so that as I'm sewing, my foot won't stick to the vinyl. Now you could use a Teflon foot so it won't stick to the vinyl if you just want to hold this in place and sew it. But I don't trust myself not to move it around, and I want it to stay in place, so I'm just going to do my little tape, and then after we've sewn it down, we'll be able to pull the tape right off. And that piece of tape did not come off as nicely as it's supposed to. So I'll get myself another piece here. I've had this masking tape. I use it down here in my sewing room and my craft room. And sometimes it's a little hard to pull it off. There we go. And I'm just pressing that down on there. But the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to mark myself a little line. I can see the edge if I run my finger along the edge of the vinyl. I can see where the vinyl is. But I'm going to make myself a little line here because it's a better visual as I'm sewing instead of trying to see that crease that I made. It'll just help me to see a little better where my vinyl is. Now, whatever works best for you, that's fine. But I know it will help me. Now, the reason why I'm using the 16 gauge is not just because it was left over, mind you, from my other project, but because 16 gauge vinyl is a little heavier. It's not too heavy, so it's not hard to sew through, especially with it being a single piece on fabric. But it also will stay sturdier, and we're going to stitch, but we're going to do our stitch. Let me see now. We're going to do our stitches. We're going to do a zigzag. And I want my zigzag to be the length to be 4.0. And let me see, I'm going to do the width at 3.5. And that should be good so that it hits the edge and keeps it on here. So let's go ahead and we'll sew this on. And you're going to use your line where the edge of your vinyl is. We're going to use that as our guide for the center of our foot. I got to put the right foot on. And I'm going to put in a matching thread. Let me see what I've got here. Oh, I think that one matches better. I'm using Aurifil thread. I love Aurifil thread. And you could do a decorative stitch around the edge of this if you wanted to. You just want to make sure if you're going to use a decorative stitch along the edge that you cut your label holder so that it's going to be wide enough that depending on how far you sew over, how far you sew over, that you're still going to be able to slip your label into it. So I'm going to do just the zigzag, but later on as I'm making these, I'm probably going to experiment and use some of my decorative stitching because we all need reasons to be able to use those. Our machines come with, quite often, many decorative stitches and we don't always get to use them. So I'm trying to purpose myself this year to use my decorative stitches more often on my projects. And where I do a lot of quilting, I don't always get a lot of opportunity for that. Though later on this year, I'm going to be showing how to make some different ways to make crazy quilt blocks where we add ribbon and lace and decorative stitching and use some of our scraps up to make blocks and then putting those blocks together to create a quilt. So that'll be another way that I get to use it up. So I'm going to go just a little bit past where my vinyl is so that I can make sure that I sew over the edge of the vinyl. And I'm going to secure it. I'm going to come forward. I'm going to go backward and then come forward again. So I reinforce these edges so that they'll stay down. So when I'm slipping my labels in, I won't be pulling this away from the fabric. Okay, so let's go ahead and sew that down. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I forgot to change out my bobbin thread, so I'm going to change that out for just a moment, and I'm going to put a matching thread, or somewhat matching, down in my bobbin. It's a green. Not that you're going to see it, but just so that it's not pulling any stitch, any threads up. It shouldn't with my I have pretty good tension, so it shouldn't do that, but just in case. And I'm going to put my needle down, and it's a good, okay. And so when you come to the very corner, you want to stop with your needle down so that you can turn or pivot your project, so you'll be able to go down the other side. So we're going to sew all the way down to that corner and stop. Now if you're doing a zigzag and when your needle comes down, it may come down to the side of your center line on your project, but you're just lining that line up that we made with the center of your foot. Now when I pivot, I'm going to check and see if my line is matching up with the center of my foot, and it is, so I can continue to stitch. My thread caught onto the bottom. And I got to take one more stitch. It's not wanting to line up for me, so I'm going to go back one more stitch, or actually back 2 stitches, so that when I pivot, and that's okay that I went a little bit past it. And I'll sew this to the end, and then I'm going to reinforce this edge as well. And we are, of course, leaving this side open so that we'll be able to slide our label right in there. So we'll be able to, and you can make cute little labels. If you have one of those labelers, you could take a piece of paper and make a little label and stick it on there, or you can just write your label onto a piece of paper. I'm going to use cardstock for my labels, just because I think they'll slip in easier. With paper, sometimes it will, stick and crumple up when you're trying to push it in. So I'm going to use cardstock. I happen to have some various colors of cardstock. I used to do scrapbooking. Now you're going to see that your tape sticks a little bit under your thread. Later on, I'm going to take some tweezers and I'll pick these pieces of tape out from underneath. For now, I'm just going to pull off the most of it that I'm able to pull off, and I'll get the rest of it later with some tweezers. But the tape makes it handier to hold down your piece of vinyl for you, and keeps your foot from sticking to that vinyl while you're sewing. And of course my tape stuck a little bit stronger to my fabric than sometimes I want it to. Painter's tape sometimes works even better than the masking tape, which I don't have any right at the moment, so that's why I use the masking tape, because the painter's tape doesn't stick quite as hard as the masking tape does. So that's just something for you to keep in mind, but either one works. And like I said, I'll just take some tweezers afterward and I'll just pull some of those extra ones out. I don't want to fidget with that right now. Ah, stuck to my fingers. But as you can see, if you just take some tweezers, you'll be able to pick that tape off. a little bit easier and just pull it off. This piece is sticky, so I'm just trying to get it off because it is sticky. All right, I'll fidget with the rest of that later. But I wanted to show you how the stitching looks. And I think that's going to be really cute, especially if you went and used some, like a decorative stitch, that would be really cute. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim my thread off because I've already reinforced the threads. But yeah, I think that's going to be really cute. So when we do fold this down, we'll have our nice little label, and you'll be able to slip your label in pretty easily. Okay, so our next thing that we're going to do, now where we put our label holder is going to be what I'm going to call the top of our box. Now I'm not using a directional fabric. Like I said, I already ironed on my fleece. If you wanted, you could even use batting in this. If you use batting though, I would do some quilting on it, whether it's free motion, or you could do the cross hatching with a walking foot, which I've done in other videos and shown other tutorials. And we're going to stack these on top of each other. And the reason why is because with the batting, if it's not quilted, it will tend to sink down inside of the stitching. So you would need to quilt that. You need something that's either stiff, that's going to fuse on this, whether it's a heavy fusible interfacing or the fusible fleece, that will sturdy up this fabric and help it to stand up better. You could use like the craft tacks, like I had mentioned. That would be sturdy in there and wouldn't be a problem, and it will stay standing up. And you could even quilt that as well if you preferred. So I'm going to line these up on top of each other. And I'm going to line these on top of those. So I'm going to have my outer pieces and my lining stacked up on top of each other. As soon as I get them matching, that'll be good. Now it doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but I just want them lined up on top of each other because we're going to cut our corners. Okay, so this is my top because that's where my label is, or going to be my label. And we're going to take a ruler. I know I said it here. There we go. And we're going to mark 2.5-inch square on each side of the bottom. Now double check your measurement with your ruler before you mark it, and especially before you cut it, just to be absolutely sure that it's going to be right at 2.5 by 2.5. And then I'm going to make my mark, and I'm just using a heat erasable Frixion pen. You could use chalk, you could use a water-soluble pen, you could use air erasable pen, whatever your preference is for marking. This is going to be our lining, so you won't even see it Okay, just double checking my measurement before I mark it. So now I've marked my corners. And the reason why I'm marking my corners is because I'm going to cut these out so that I can make boxed corners in the bottom of my little fabric box. I'm hoping that you're being able to see that well in the camera. So I've marked out my corners on each side, 2.5 by 2.5 inches. And that's the size for the small that we're making. Like I said, you'll have measurements for the larger ones on a PDF in our group. So if you want to make some different sized ones, it's really neat. I used to have some that went from large down in sizes, so that I had like the larger one, next one, and they went down to the smaller size. I thought they were cute that way. I don't know what I'm going to do this time, but I do need to make some new ones. My other ones have gotten older, and there's so many more exciting fabrics out, and I'd like to make some more. Okay, I just need to find my good scissors. You know, I hide those so nobody uses them. Let me grab my scissors. Okay, found them. I like to use my gingers because my gingers are nice and sharp, and I know I'll be able to cut. And I didn't use a rotary cutter, and I'll explain to you why. Because when you get to this corner, a rotary cutter is going to tend to roll. If you want to get your corner exact, it's going to tend to roll in and cut into the fabric more to get a sharp corner. That's why I'm using my scissors. And I'm doing this in a stack because I want these to all be exactly the same. If I cut them separate, I do still have a good chance if I, measure each one out. But I don't see the sense in measuring each one out separately. It just takes extra work. So I layer them and then I trim them. I'm just going to readjust the top of this because I can see that it's just a little off. And they don't have to be perfect. These are just fabric boxes. They're not a block for a quilt. And so I'm taking and I'm holding on to my corner, and I'm going to cut these corners out. And I'll do that on each side. There we go. So now we have our corners cut out. Trying to make sure that this is getting into the video. There we go. So I have my corners cut out, and that's where I had measured the 2.5 inches on each side. And we're all ready to sew them together. So I'm going to take the right side of my lining. And if you have a directional fabric, remember, this is going to be your lining inside, so you'll have to, if you do have a directional fabric, you did have to think about, when this folds over, you want this to come down so that you're seeing it in the direction that you would want to see whatever's on it. I chose a solid for the inside, and my outside's not a directional fabric, so I didn't have to think about that. But if you use a directional fabric on your lining, it's not a big concern what's inside, but when you fold your sides over, you'll want whatever's directional to show going in this direction. So, okay, so I'm going to put right side to right side, which means my label's going to be on the inside for now. And I'm just going to clip my sides together so that they match up. And I'll do that on each side ahead of time. And I'm going to clip this one now because it's going to get sewn exactly the same way as my lining. So you want to put right side to right side. And we're just going to do a straight stitch, just a regular stitch. Let me get these lined up here. And we're going to do a seam of 2.5 inches. Not 2.5 inches. Oh my goodness. I was thinking of my corners. A 1/2 inch seam on each side. Oh my goodness. I promise these are going to come out right when we get them done. Okay, so now we have our sides, and you're going to go ahead and you're going to sew from the very top to the very bottom, a 1/2 inch seam from the edge, and you're going to do the same on your lining as well. You'll sew from the top to the bottom. You don't have to worry about reinforcing it because we're going to be stitching over that anyway. So we don't have to do the reverse to reinforce our stitches. But you'll do this on each side. And I've got to make sure I put this into straight stitching. So go ahead and do that with all of your sides. Go ahead and do your 1/2 inch seam. Okay, so once we get our sides done, we're just going to roll it forward a little bit, and we'll finger press. I'm not going to bother to iron them, but if you want, you can press them with your iron. Just make sure if you do press them with your iron that you don't have this folded over underneath and cause a crease in it, because then you have to iron it all out and it's a pain. I'm just finger pressing. Nobody's going to see the inside of my box, so I'm not too worried about it. Okay, and I'm going to do the same on the outside of my box fabric. Now this won't finger press down as easily, so you may want to go ahead and press that if you want. I'm not going to bother with it myself because, like I said, it's the inside of my box. Nobody's going to see it. Eventually, as I'm using my box, these will flatten out anyway. So I'm just going to finger press. So now we're going to do the same on the bottoms. I'm only going to put one clip on one side just so that I know that I have my fabric lined up there. And you're going to sew a 1/2 inch all the way across each bottom. This bottom of your outside and the one for your lining. So let's go ahead and do that. I know I just clipped it and then I threw my clip in there, but it'll be fine. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to roll this up a little bit and I'll finger press my seam. And I'm going to do the same on my lining. I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch across that bottom. And I'm going to trim my threads out of the way. And then I'll just roll this up just a little bit. Got to get my finger in there so I can roll it up a little bit. There we go. And I'm going to finger press the bottom. So now our bottom is sewn and our sides are sewn on each piece. So they'll look pretty much like this. So now we're going to box our corners on each one of our pieces. And to box our corners, all we're going to do is you have your cutout piece like this. I'm just going to take where the inside corner is, right in here. I'm going to take each side and I'm going to open it up. And I'm going to match up my seams. Now you can either put a pin in here or you can clip it. It's up to you. But I'm going to match up my seams, bottom and the side. And then I'm just going to flatten this out. And I'll put one clip over on this side just to hold it in place. And you just want to make sure that your raw edges are lining up to each other. And you just want to make sure also that this is flat, not bunched up underneath or on top. And you're going to lay it down flat like this. I'm going to lower my camera just a little bit. There we go. So I'm just going to flatten it out like this. And I'm making sure that it's not lumped up underneath or on top. And I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam from the very edge to the very edge over here. I am going to reinforce my stitching right here and on the end. So on the beginning and the end. So once again, a 1/2 inch seam, and we're going to reinforce it. And I'll reinforce the end. And I'll trim my threads. Get those out of my way. And so you're going to do the same on the other side. So now you can see it's boxed on this side. So if we was to hold our side out, and this is our bottom, you can see it's starting to get that box effect to it, or the square effect to it. So we're going to do the same with this side. We're going to take our bottom and our side, and we'll match up our seams to each other. And I'll put a clip there. And then I'm going to lay it down flat. Now see, this is standing up like this. And I'm taking my bottom and I'm just making sure that it's nice and flat. I've already matched up my seam from the side to the bottom. I'll put a clip over there, and I'm just double checking that my seams are flat. This one's folded over. And I see how I had that one folded over? It was folded over like this. I want to make sure that when I clip these, that I'm keeping my seams flat to each side, so they're not folded over when I sew them. And I'm just double checking underneath to make sure that there's no lumpiness and it stays nice and flat. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to sew it a 1/2 inch from side to side, and I'm going to reinforce each end of it. Now with this fusible fleece, it does get a little bulky right at the seams, but not too bad. You can use craft text, like I was saying, if you want it to be more stabilized, you want it to stand up straighter. But it will get a little thicker from that craft text right in your seam area. And that shouldn't be a problem for your sewing machine to go through. If you have a little more bulkiness like that, when you have seams together like that, just slow down when you go to sew across it. So now that we've done both sides, this is going to end up being the outside. So we're just going to push that through, and we're going to turn it out, and go ahead and make your corners with your finger. Just poke it. And this is going to be the outside of my fabric box. And I take where my seam is down here, and I'm just going to kind of finger press it across. And the same on the other side. And now, even without doing my lining and everything, my little box is standing up. So go ahead and box your corners on your lining, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, so now our lining is done and the outside of our box is done. We're going to leave our lining wrong side out for now. And we're going to have what's going to be the outside of our box right side out. And we're going to take this and we're going to insert this inside of the lining. Just shake it around a little bit, let that get in there. And what we're going to do is we're going to first take our seam from this part of our bag to the lining of our bag. And we want those to line up. And you can either pin it or you can clip it, whichever works best for you. And then we're going to line up our other seam on the other side. Now, depending on how you want to do yours, some people like to leave an opening on the side of their bag. So when they did their side, they would have sewn up to here, left a little bit of an opening, and then sewn up to here. And then they use that opening for when they turn their bag. I'm going to leave my opening on the back side because I'm going to edge stitch around it afterward. So I figure since I'm going to edge stitch anyways, there is no reason why not to completely do my sides. So you may have seen this where people leave their opening on the inside of their lining and then they stitch that up afterward by hand or by machine. I don't prefer to do mine that way. So you're seeing, if you've seen this done before, you're probably thinking, well, why didn't she leave an opening for turning this? Unless you've never made one before or seen them made before. Then you don't have a question. Okay, so now I have both sides. I have my seams on this side lined up. It's really hard sometimes to get all this into the camera. So I have my seams on this side lined up, and I have my seam on this side lined up. So now I'm going to go around the edge of my bag, and I'm going to line up raw edge to raw edge. And I'm just going to put a couple of clips on each side to make sure that it's lined up. And if you need to, just go ahead and stick your hand in there and you can pull your lining up a little bit. You just want to make sure that your raw edges are lined up. And I'll put a couple clips on the back side. Excuse me. Okay. So I've got this all flipped up. My label's in the front, so I know that this is the front side. I'm going to start sewing right about here where my clip is. I'm going to leave an opening, probably about 2 inches or so, which will be more than enough. When I sew here, I'm going to reinforce this side, and when I end over here, I'm going to reinforce this side. And I'm going to leave my opening on the back side. So like I said, I'm going to start sewing here, and I'm going to do a 1/2 inch seam all the way around until I get to this clip over here. So just an opening about 2 to 3 inches, whatever makes you feel comfortable. Leave that much open so that you'll be able to turn your bag. So let's go ahead and sew that. Now my machine sits so that it's in a table. If you have your machine above the table, you could use, take your piece off and just use your arm piece, and this will just go around. I have it in the table, so I'm just going to lay it down flat and sew it all the way around 1/2 inch. Get my thread over here. And I forgot to do what I told you to do, which was reinforce it, so I'm just going to go back and reinforce that. And that's just so that as I'm turning my bag right side out, that I don't pull those stitches apart. And I'm just turning my bag as I go because I don't have the ability to have this up here. I could use my other machine, but it's easier for me to film from this machine because I have the most lighting. And as you go around, if your pieces start to separate so that they're not raw edge to raw edge, just readjust them so that they are. These make really cute gifts for Christmas or for birthdays, Mother's Day. Because you can store all kinds of stuff in these. It's not limited to our sewing room. Okay, I took my clip out. I want to leave that opening. So I'm going to go just a little bit more, and then I'm going to reinforce this. And I'll trim my threads out of the way. So now I have an opening right here. If you used Craft Tex or whatever and you didn't have it so that it's a fusible and you have 3 separate pieces here, that's fine, but you're going to turn it between the 2 fabrics. And I've got just enough room for my fingers to go in there. But if you don't, you can also just pull this up and poke it through. Just poke the bottom through that opening and just slowly pull it out of the opening. Now as you pull this out, I'll get there. I like to go slow because I don't want to tear where I've sewn it. Now you're going to poke, let me see. Now as I pulled it through, this is still, see how this is still on the back side. Now you're going to go to the other side of it and you're going to pull your lining through. So now it looks kind of odd because you have the outside of your bag here and you have your lining here. So then you're just going to take your lining that's now right side out and you're going to push it down inside your box. Now we're going to line up our edges. So I'm just going to take and I'm going to go around my edges and I'm going to clip it so that my line, and I'm going to finger press as I go. You could take this over and you could use your iron and you could iron that down if you want. Now, if you wanted to, when we did that seam, you could have added some lace to the edge of this, and it would have been stuffed inside, and then it would have popped out from your seam. Another time when I do a different kind of these, I'll show you how I do that. Today, I mostly wanted to show you the label, because I was excited about doing this with the label. And you definitely could add lace even at this point, and I'll show you in just a moment. So when you get to your back side, and see, I have my lining just to the inside. If it pokes out a little bit, it's not a big deal. And I'm just clipping it as I go. And like I said, finger pressing. Now when I come to the part that I haven't sewn yet, I'm just going to fold the lining down that 1/2 inch, and I'm going to fold the front down. And by having your sides clipped that you did sew, that'll fold down a little bit easier for you and a little bit flatter. See how that's kind of wanting to fold all on its own? And I'm just going to lay those up against each other, and I'm going to clip them together. And when I go around and I do my edge stitching, and you may have to roll your lining in a little bit, or your front, or your outside of your bag rather, down a little bit. And just fidget with it until they're laying up against each other, nice and flat. And if you have to, you can just lay it down on the table even to get it done a little bit easier. Doing it up in the air is a little more difficult. Okay, so now I have that clipped all the way around. And I'm going to start sewing right on the side at a seam. And then I'm going to sew all the way around. And I'm just going to do a straight stitch at the moment. But if you wanted, you could do you could definitely do a decorative stitch. That would be perfectly fine. But I'm just going to edge stitch so that these stay together and I close up my opening. Now there's several different ways that you can do this so that you can edge stitch it. You can just have it guided up against the edge of the inside of your foot. your straight stitch foot. I'm going to use what they call a left edge top stitch foot. I use this a lot when I'm binding and doing different things. Because one side is up higher than the other side, the edge of my fabric will stay right where that line is on my foot, and it will stay pressed up against it, and it won't go past it so it doesn't shift, and it keeps me doing a straight line. You could do the same thing with a regular foot by having it guided up on the inside of the foot and just watch that it's staying there. And it will work just fine. But we're just going to do an edge stitching approximately, this is going to be approximately about an 1/8 of an inch from the edge, approximately. And I've just got to get this down there so that it's lined up with my foot properly. And that's not where I wanted to start. I wanted to start where I have a seam, mind you. I like to start where the seam is because you're not going to notice it as much on that side as you would on the front, or the, well, you wouldn't notice it as much on the back either, but And I am going to reinforce my stitch there. And then you're just going to hold this flat and just remember to make sure that it doesn't bunch up or pucker as you go around. Now I'm just making sure as I go around that it's nice and flat. And you could add some lace to this edge. And you would have, so your lace would come out this way. Because when you fold it over, you want your lace to hang down. Or you could put any kind of like decorative stuff on here. Rickrack. I was trying to think of the name of it. But you could put rickrack on here. There's all kinds of different decorative stuff. If you use a lace, then it, you're wanting it to hang down this way because we're going to be folding our edge down. You could do a decorative stitch here. That would be pretty. Not too long ago, before I moved and relocated here, I gave a lot of my lace away, and now I'm regretting it because I found so many projects since I gave it away that I could have used it for. Now when you come up to the back side and you come up to that part that doesn't have your seam, just make sure that it's matched up and stays flat, and we'll be closing that up. Now hopefully I'll get this nice and flat so it's not puckery. get one little pucker there, but that's all right. It's on the back side. And that's because I didn't fold my inside well enough. And I might just take that apart after and fix it. And I'm going to reinforce it where I'm going to end off. And I'll trim my threads. Oh, it's not too bad. And then you'll fold your sides down as far as you would like them to go down. This is going to look a little funny because I haven't pulled out my extra tape from around my stitching on my label. And you'll just push your insides so that it makes your nice little box. And this will look better when I pull my pieces of tape out, of course. But as you can see, this makes a cute little box. And if you had added some lace that would hang down, that would be cute. Or put some rickrack around the edge or a decorative stitch, that would look, you know, even more cute. And now you have room that if you wanted to put a little label in there, your little label will slip right in. And there you go. That's our little fabric box. I hope that you've enjoyed our tutorial. And I hope that you'll make several fabric boxes for your sewing room. They're so cute, so decorative, and so useful at the same time. So if you have found this helpful, I hope that you'll take just a moment and like our video. Please subscribe to our channel. And next to the subscribe button, there's a little bell. And if you click on that little bell, you can set your notifications for our channel to all, or leave it how it is, or, you know, however you want to set them. But if you do set it to all, then each time that we come out with a new tutorial, you'll get notified and you'll be able to see the tutorial. My next tutorial is going to be the Rocky Mountain Table Runner, and I'm going to be doing a tutorial on paper piecing with log cabin blocks. So I hope that you'll join me for those. Happy sewing!